Okay, so today we're going to go over basic right angle trigonometry, not sine rule and cosine rule, just the basic right angled trigonometry. So we're looking at SO, Ca, Toa. And all this means is sine is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, cos is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and tan is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. That's our rule for any right angle trig. So if you see a right angle triangle and there's an angle inside it, we should be thinking SO, Ca, Toa. If you see a right angle triangle with no angle, it's possibly a Pythagoras question. But if we see an angle inside, definitely SO, Ca, Toa. So what is O and A and all these things? Well, whenever we get a triangle, we would label up our triangle based on the angle. So the first thing I would label up is my opposite. So I look at my angle and I say the length opposite is obviously named the opposite. Yeah? Not a huge leap. The other one we know is that opposite a right angle. So opposite the angle is the opposite. And then opposite the right angle is the longest side of a right angle triangle. So that's going to be our hypotenuse. Okay, so that's our H. And the remaining side is therefore the adjacent. And that is obviously adjacent to the angle. So we can't do that until we know what the opposite and the hypotenuse is, because obviously this could be the adjacent. It's adjacent to the angle, but because it's opposite the right angle, it is the hypotenuse. So take your time to label your triangle up first, would be my first advice. And then let's circle what we know. So we know the hypotenuse is 8, and we're trying to find the opposite x. So we don't know that, but that's going to be part of our question. The side that we don't really care about here is the adjacent. So I would write down SO, Ca, Toa, and I would click off all the O's. There's an opposite and an opposite. Then I click off all the hypotenuse. There. That's it. So in this case, it's going to have to be a SO question. Yeah. So it's going to be sine is opposite over adjacent. Now I've just written sine is equal to that. What I really should have written actually is sine of x is equal to opposite over adjacent, where x is the angle. Right? It's not this x in here. That's what we're trying to find. It's just what I'm going to say is for the angle. Okay, so you can say sine of the angle, but we usually write x. So then say that sine of 30 is equal to the opposite, which in this case is x, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 8. And then we need to rearrange. So I'm going to times both sides by 8. 30x is equal to x. So all I've done is I bring this 8 up by multiplying both sides, and then just use your calculator to work out the answer. Check your calculator gives you a good answer. Make sure it's in degrees. If you get a funny answer, you've possibly got it in radians. So check up at the top, it says deg. Okay, so I'm going to write 8 times sine of 30, and that's giving me 4. Now I can look at that and say that seems sensible. If this side here is 8, I understand that's 4. If I was getting something like 0.2 or 100, that's when I'd think maybe there's a mistake. And then don't forget your units as well. So pretty straightforward. Write out your SO, Ca, Toa, label your triangle, tick off what you know, and then substitute. I'd say the hardest bit is possibly the rearranging. In this case, it was a straightforward one. We would just bring the 8 up. But sometimes people get it confused if we're rearranging differently. So that's our first one. Let's try another one down here. So I'm going to label up, and just move this up a little bit. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is label my triangle. So opposite the angle is the opposite. Opposite the right angle is the hypotenuse, and that leaves this side to be the adjacent. So I know what the adjacent is. I'm trying to find the hypotenuse, so I don't really care about O. So I would just write out SO, Ca, Toa, and the more confident you become, you can maybe skip this stage. But in a test, in an exam, take your time, don't throw away marks. So I'll tick off my A's, tick off my H's. Oh, this is going to be a cos question. So in that case, it's going to be cos of x is equal to the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. X being the angle, not necessarily this x. So cos of 48 is therefore equal to 10 divided by the hypotenuse, which is x. And this is the rearrange that people find confusing. Now this equation here to me is very similar to speed equals distance over time. And we would rearrange that to be distance divided by speed equals time. So if I was trying to rearrange to be this the subject, I would do this divided by this. And that's, I don't know if you've done this in physics, but if you get the little triangle out where it's speed, distance times time, and it's whichever one you cover up as what you're trying to make the subject. So if I'm trying to make t the subject, I'd highlight t, and you can see it's d over s is what's left over, and d divided by s. Yeah, if I cover up s, I get d divided by t. So it's kind of the same. You know, what we're going to end up with for our next step would be 10 divided by cos of 48. Oops. Cos of 48 equals x. Now what I've actually done there is I've moved the x up and then divided by the cos of 48. So it's like these two have switched places. So please be careful when you're doing that rearrange. That's the one that most people find tricky. So let's just do that on the calculator. 10 divided by cos of 48. That's going to give me around that, call it 15 degrees. Okay, so x is equal to 15, not 15 degrees, sorry, 15 centimetres. And again, I'm looking, thinking it makes sense. This side is 10, I could get on board, that's 15. If you're getting something like 3 in a million, you've got a problem. So yeah, that's us done a wee sine and a cos. And the very last one, or second last one, let's label this one up. So over here is my opposite, so opposite the angle, hypotenuse, adjacent. So I know the opposite. I'm trying to find the adjacent, so I don't care about hypotenuse. So ka, toa. So I'll tick off the O's. There's an O here and an O here. Tick off the adjacents, there and there. So that's a tan. And whenever you're not dealing with hypotenuse, it's a tan, okay? So tan of x is equal to opposite over adjacent. Tan of 65 is therefore equal to 8.5 divided by x. And it's the same as the last one. I'm going to switch over these two terms. So times by x to get the x up here, and then divide by the tan. So your next line, just do it in one. It's going to be 8.5 divided by tan 65. So those two have just switched places. Okay, these two here. Next one. So back to the calculator. I've got 8.5 divided by tan of 65, and that's going to give me 3.96. So just I'll call that 4 for the purposes of today. 4 centimetres. Again, looks about right. You know, I can get my head around that. The very last thing I'd like to do, I'll just do one of these actually, is when we're trying to find the angle. Yeah, I'll do question B. So we do the exact same as before. We label everything up. I've got the opposite, I've got the hypotenuse, and I've got my adjacent. So in this case, I know the adjacent, I know the hypotenuse, and I'm trying to find x. Just do the exact same as before. So, ka, toa. So tick off my A's and H's. There's an A and an A, H and an H. Going to be cos. So I'll write that out this time. Cos of x is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. And this time x is x on the question. So we just keep that the same. And A is 45 and H 65. Now this one, we don't need to really rearrange too hard, because everything's ready. We just need to do the inverse of cos. So it's going to be cos negative 1, 45 divided by 65. Yeah, so I still think this one is harder for doing the rearranging, this type where you need to switch these two. For this one, how do I get rid of cos? You can't divide by cos, you can't add, multiply by cos. You do the inverse. And what that's going to look like on your calculator is x is equal to shift cos. Yeah, shift cos of 45 divided by 65. So if you're thinking about inverse, that's what the negative 1 means. Don't worry, we're just doing shift cos. So on the calculator, say shift cos. Oh, I said sine cos. Shift cos. There we go. 45 divided by 65, and that's given me 46. And the answer for these is obviously always in degrees. So I've got 46.2 degrees. So that's a quick run through of your basic trig. I'd say always write down so, ka, toa, label your triangle, hypotenuse, opposite, and then finally the adjacent. Tick off what you know, write your equation down, substitute, rearrange. For my money, the hardest rearrange is this one, where you have your x on the bottom, all you have to do is switch these two terms round. Okay, they'll switcheroo. Right. For this one, it's your shift cost to get rid of cost. You can't divide by cost, can't take it away. To undo it, you need to do the inverse, which is just shift cost. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Yeah, thanks very much for listening.